Hello, everybody. Welcome to my seminar by the Haven, The Significance of Creative Writing. So here we have four pictures that are, varied in time, place, and, illustrative power. You can probably recognize at least one of them right here on the left. It's The Great Gatsby, one of the covers of the famous novel, The Great Gatsby. In the middle is a tablet with some Mesopotamian cuneiform on it. And on the right, you might have seen it in a TED Talk before. And on the bottom left is a picture of none other than our favorite wimpy kid, Greg Heffley. So let's see why these tie together. So if you haven't realized that these are all stories or relating to stories in some way, and what we want to see is, why do we write stories? Why does creative writing exist? Well, we have hardships in multiple respects: love, honor, being a student. We have to record those, right? In Romeo and Juliet, basic foundation of the conflict is love. In the Epic of Gilgamesh, it's honor, and we'll see a little bit more. And in basically our good guy Greg Heffley's story, it is being a student and everything that comes with being a student. We also write stories to teach lessons. You can think of Aesop's fables, you can think of allegorical stories, maybe the Bible, if you really think that it's been written by somebody, like made up by somebody. It is a piece of creative writing, no matter how you look at it. And it's universal. Stories are universal. You will have heard this in your English classes, that Romeo and Juliet is still prevalent today because it's universal. Everybody has love. Things like that. Although some people want to be edgelords and they don't want to agree, well, it's still there. Majority of people think so. So let's start with this stone tablet. This is one of the tablets of the Epic of Gilgamesh, which is a epic written in about 2,000 to 1,500 years ago, not before what people think is the birth of Christ. And this was written so long ago, so if there are any themes that bother you, just take it with a grain of salt, because this was written in a period where people were not so conscious of being politically correct. So here we go, Tablet 1. Gilgamesh is oppressing his people by making them participate in games and such for his amusement, or for some other forced labor. And in response, the gods are not happy with this. You are sullying their image, and you are not being what the king should be. And they produce an equal who can stop him, and his name is Enkidu. So he's basically a full-grown man, just naked in the wild. So he lives and steals catches from a trapper to feed himself. And then this trapper complains to Gilgamesh that there's this naked man running around in the forest, taking his catch. And eventually a priestess, in the book it's a priestess prostitute, that finds Enkidu and shows him the ways of civilization, hint, hint. And this coincides with a vision of Gilgamesh's, that a companion will arise, such a great legend that will rival him in power and stature. So this, you can see, is a bunch of exposition, and nothing really is happening. There is not much conflict. Well, there is the conflict that is present throughout the story, but there is no big crescendo movement. So we look at Tablet 2. Enkidu is angered at Gilgamesh's treatment of the new brides, which is basically saying that Enkidu really doesn't like how Gilgamesh is treating his people. And he decides to confront the king, and they fight in an epic fist fight. They become friends when Enkidu acknowledges his superior strength. And Enkidu actually journeys with Gilgamesh to fight a monstrous demigod in the forest. Once they become friends, Gilgamesh says it's a good idea because it'll bring them fame. And you can see that this is a friendship built out of brotherly respect, because one, they've just been fighting each other. They're not very good friends at this point. So Gilgamesh suffers a lot of dreams. So he's approaching this holy figure, this deity, and he's going to
have several dreams about numerous threats. But Enkidu says, no, no. They're good omens. We don't need to pay attention to any of them. And they spar with the demigod, and the demigod actually surrenders. And Gilgamesh says, hey, we won't kill you, but Enkidu sort of maybe out of character if you think that he is made of gods, but we'll explain why this isn't out of character, but Enkidu encourages Gilgamesh to kill the demigod. Gilgamesh does so, and whenever you kill a immortal deity, nothing good is really going to happen. Let me get into 6, 7, and 8. So after this, Ishtar, the goddess of love, fertility, and sex and war, she goes to Gilgamesh, and he rejects her advances. And then because of this, she vows to raise the dead and leads the Bull of Heaven to destroy Gilgamesh's city. The Bull of Heaven is usually interpreted as a huge bull with wings, and it's huge. Gilgamesh and Enkidu actually kill them, and the city celebrates. So this is one of their trials another of the trials that they face. But after that, Enkidu has an ominous dream about his future failure and fall and death, stuff like that, which Enkidu is terrified. The dream signals that one of them must die because they've slain gods and, a heavenly creature. And then Enkidu takes the brunt of it, not by his own choice. And then Enkidu curses the people like the trapper and the priestess prostitute because they've civilized him and brought him to meet Gilgamesh, and fate has brought him to be cursed like this. But then he regrets them in sort of like a cry not because it was over, but laugh because it happened, or something, pithy the moms hang up on their walls, and then he has another dream in which he is taken into the underworld. So Enkidu perishes in Gilgamesh's arms, sadly, when they're traversing the underworld. And in a terrific show of loyalty and camaraderie, Gilgamesh mourns him gravely, but after he dies, Gilgamesh he denies that Enkidu has died until a maggot literally drops out of Enkidu's nose. And, maggots don't happen instantaneously upon death. They take like a week or so to develop from their eggs and then burrow through the flesh and stuff like that. So, yeah, Gilgamesh shows a lot of conviction here, and he's greatly hurt. So the thing about this is that almost everyone will have someone they love or greatly respect die in their lives. People, maybe a grandmother, and when you internalize that, it seems unbelievable because sometimes there will be remainders of their existence. And the Epic of Gilgamesh captures this by even having a close to God king do this, mourn his dead brother who, died unfortunately and is terribly, I don't know how to say this, but let's just say that Enkidu's death impacted him greatly, and a lot of people have those deaths in their lives. So grieving for Enkidu, Gilgamesh begins to fear for his own life. So, what if a man made of godhood could be killed like that instantly? Gilgamesh, starts to devise ways of immortality, but then he realizes that, there's a guy who is immortal, and he survived a great flood. And this man is called Utnapishtim. And this immortal man who built a boat and survived a great flood that devoured the earth, warns him about the dangers of immortality. And we might have seen some media that, when you outlive everybody you love, like Steve Rogers and Captain America, it's not a particularly happy existence. That's what Utnapishtim is trying to convey here. So Utnapishtim says, hey, I'll cut you a deal. Try to stay awake for a week straight. We've pulled all-nighters before, studying for things, but this is on an entirely different level. Gilgamesh tries to do that. But the catch is, every time he falls asleep, Utnapishtim tells his wife that, hey, bake a loaf of bread. And then, obviously, Gilgamesh cannot complete this feat. And Utnapishtim just says, if you cannot cheat sleep, then forget about cheating death. But Gilgamesh is persistent, right? He doesn't learn anything from the experience. And Utnapishtim says, okay, here, there's a plant under the sea, and there's a snake guarding it. See if you can get that plant. That plant is, gives immortality. Gilgamesh fails in obtaining the plant and returns to a city. The snake steals it away. And in almost a depressing ending, the huge walls remind him of the insurmountable ability of death to be not cheated. You can't cheat death. That's just the moral of the story. Obviously, there are major themes, and one of them is the fear of death. From killing to the raising of the dead, to fearing the bull, to Enkidu dying, to Gilgamesh eventually dying off screen as he lives out his old age. This is something that all Mesopotamians in that order, in that time, feared, and we still fear death today because none of us are truly immortal. Even though we say that, Freddie Mercury is immortal because his music lives on. Well, no, he's dead. Also, another theme is heeding divine omens. Well, let me give you a little bit of background on Mesopotamia. So, let's see. If we look at a map right here, we can see that ancient Mesopotamia was here, and this was where the Epic of Gilgamesh was written. It was written. Research doesn't know exactly why it was written, for who it was written, but we can safely deduce that it was a story told verbally. And this was from the Tigris. There are two rivers, so you can see here in Lower Egypt, you direct your eyes towards the left of the page. It is one river, and this river, the Nile River, is very, very predictable. You can predict when it will flood. You can also predict how big of a flood it will get. And that's what they based their agriculture on, because irrigation required, rivers overflooding and bringing the sediments full of nitrogen, phosphorus, and, all the good stuff for the plants. But the problem with putting your agriculture in between the Euphrates and Tigris is that they always flood unpredictably in both strength and, time period, frequency. So the problem with that is that, you might get a very good chain of floods, and then people start to overproduce their crops, but then the rivers die down. They don't flood at all. What if they don't flood? Then your crops all die because they're dry. What if you flood way too aggressively? Your crops get washed away, and that's the bad part about it. So Akkad and Babylon and all of these cities, Uruk, by the way, is the name of Gilgamesh's city. They all have very, very wrathful gods, and if you saw with Enkidu's omens and such, these are the gods speaking to him, that they're warning him. And when you don't know modern science, you tend to internalize and understand all these natural phenomena in god-like terms. So these gods, compared to Egypt's, become very wrathful. They become very unpredictable, and that's why Ishtar maybe has some issues. She gets rejected, and then she has a lot of issues and threatens death upon a whole city of people. So that's basically how this Epic of Gilgamesh conveys Mesopotamia's society. So what of the Great Gatsby? What of the Great Gatsby, and why do those blue eyes stare at us so intensely? Well, we have wealth and class separation, love, defeat. If you have read the Great Gatsby, and we will get to the plot later, if you have read the Great Gatsby, these are our themes. So we start with, East Egg and West Egg. These are two scores of rich people. There are two factions of rich people, let's just say that. And then in the inner city of New York, there are poor people. And, when you get to that part of American history after the First World War. Everything's booming. People don't care about drinking and smoking and all those things. You know, you start to get a little crazy in the separation of wealth. And we won't get to political, obviously, but there's also love. When it does Daisy love Gatsby truly? Does Daisy love Tom Buchanan? Does Gatsby love Daisy? Does who the heck is Jordan Baker? Stuff like that. And then there's defeat. You know, Gatsby, this is a classic, so if you get spoiled, it's not my fault. Gatsby dies in the end, and he doesn't get to love Daisy. And the major theme is that nothing is gilded or, you know, as pretty as the American dream. If we look at the Diary of the Wimpy Kid, we can also see very relatable themes come up. You know, everybody has to grow up. Well, people that are still alive. Everybody has moral dilemmas. You know, should you take that apple or not? You know, is that a shopping cart of somebody else? And you all, people pretty much grow in chaotic families. Every family is chaotic to some extent, and Jeff Kinney realizes this in the preteen audience, and he brings that out in his story. And relatable kid things. If all the kids that, you know, read Diary of a Wimpy Kid relate to Greg because he plays video games, he is, you know, a misunderstood sociopath or something like that because kids want to be edgy. But yes, those are relatable kid things of, you know, failing in class and stuff like that. But what is the point of all of these themes? Well, I've been saying it over and over again, relatableness. You know, you can't have a story without it being relatable to your audience, or yourself even. You can't, this will be touched on later, but you can't write something that you don't know. Every story reflects on a situation. Gatsby reflects on futility of trying, you know, like climbing up the social ladder. Gilgamesh reflects on futility of cheating death. Diary of the Wimpy Kid reflects on how crappy it is to be a preteen. And the universality of the human experience. Like, everybody is human. Therefore, they should have the same experiences. Also, the hero's journey. The hero's journey, or the monomyth, you may have heard of. And this is something that will tie all these together, creative writing, into one thing. So let's look at this. On first glance, it looks like a clock. That's right, because it's cyclical. And, you know, every day you will have 6 o'clock, you will have 9 o'clock. That's why in every story you will have a very big crisis. You will have a return to normal. Those happen at the climax and at the falling. If you have read about the story Mountain, stuff like that in grade school, yes, this is basically the story Mountain, except it, you know, more philosophicalizes everything. So we start with the status quo. This is the exposition. Remember, we saw that in the Epic of Gilgamesh, where Enkidu was a naked man running around in the forest. That was the status quo. Then we have our call to adventure, where they have all the visions and, oh, I will have a great counterpart, Gilgamesh says. And then the assistance comes when Enkidu and Gilgamesh get together. They depart for the magical world of demigods and heavenly bulls. They face the trials of Ishtar and the demigod. They approach the crisis with the with the omens that Enkidu hears. And then the crisis is when Enkidu dies. So the problem with this is that no story is going to exactly fit the hero's journey, but it is a good layout. Where it diverges is the treasure. One can argue semantically that, you know, the treasure of Gilgamesh's journey was what happened after the crisis was that Gilgamesh had deeper respect for Enkidu and wanted to, you know, seek immortality, but that's not really a treasure at all, because then your story is now over. So what Gilgamesh actually does is he ends at the crisis, jumps to a resolution where he grieves, and then jumps all the way back to another departure for Mr. Utnapishtim's home. And then they go through trials again. The crisis is this snake steals the plant away, and then his treasure is realizing that death cannot be cheated. So this is a more convoluted hero's journey, but it is a hero's journey nonetheless. Gatsby, again, Daisy invites Nick Carraway as a narrator to the East Egg, which is where all the rich people go. And Nick doesn't really like it because he sees all these extravagant displays of wealth, and he's a little disgusted because Tobey Maguire, the person acting as Nick Carraway in the movie, lives in a small cottage on East Egg. But Gatsby invites him to a party, invites everyone to his party, and he's dragged back into the special world of the rich. And then these trials and tribulations of discovering how disgusting it is to be rich. And this crisis does not directly involve Carraway, but it all more so like when Gatsby gets accused by Tom of being a bootlegger, and they go through that crisis together. The little bit Gatsby and Nick, their stories are a little bit similar. But Gatsby dies where Nick has his crisis, and then they follow a very, very short descent into the resolution. You could argue that when Gatsby dies, that is the return for Nick to the ordinary world, because Gatsby is gone. He's no longer able to invite Nick to his parties. But yes, both of these interpretations, in my eyes, is correct. But why does this hero's journey fit so well? Everyone's faced troubles before, like we've said this again. And every trouble has this basic structure. So imagine your phone says low battery, 20%. There are two options, low power mode and close. Close to ignore it. Both of them basically ignore it because your phone is going to run out of battery anyway. So you refuse the call, and then you get whisked back in when your phone says, hey, I'm at 5%, can you please charge me? Then your phone starts running out of battery, which is your crisis. Oh my God, I'm not going to be able to watch Netflix on it anymore. And then you're starting to search, and your trial is going through every room trying to find an available charger. Your crisis is when your phone actually gets to 1%, but then your treasure is that your phone didn't die after all. You can still plug it in, and it has that whoomp noise when it gets to 1% once you charge it. And then your resolution is that, hey, maybe I shouldn't replace my phone charger everywhere so I can't find it, or you may not even learn anything. That is a resolution nonetheless. And another point about the hero's journey is that if you complicate it, you do not defeat it. The hero's journey just simply does not go away. Because once you see that in Gilgamesh, there are two storylines. There are actually two heroes' journey. One of Enkidu, which falls short at crisis number 6, and one of Gilgamesh that loops back around a couple times. And that is still a hero's journey. It does not defeat it. Every story, no story will become, perfectly a clock shape or a mountain shape, right? And that brings us to entertainment. Like, you have to spice things up a bit. You can't write the same story over and over again, or you'll get bored. The writer will get bored. The author will get bored, and your audience will get bored. So why do we see a need to write? Well, we tell lessons. We teach lessons. That's why we write about certain stories. Then we also have relatableness. Everything is relatable. Like, you have faced certain bereavements before. You have faced certain deaths. You have faced certain failures in your judgment. And it's also another way to interpret the world, as you saw with the Mesopotamians and their flooding rivers. It's also inspiration. You get inspiration from a funny story. Maybe in this time, you saw somebody buy a crap ton of toilet paper and you're going to tell your friends about it on Twitter. You also have ideals, right? You have ideals about what you want your world to be. Your world, maybe you don't want your coronavirus to be here anymore. That's what we probably all want. But you also want a world where there's less things like police brutality and stuff like that. Maybe you also want a world that everybody can conform to capitalism. We won't get into politics, okay, again, but everybody has these viewpoints of what they think the world should be, and that's good because we need to share those more and work towards a common ground. And then the commentary, you know, SNL has short skits, but those are the little stories about themselves, and they usually involve commentary of one form or another. But why do we think they're relatable? Well, you can't create something out of nothing. You must have experiences that inspire writing. You know, if you were a baby in your womb, all you would know is the warm darkness of the uterus, if you were able to comprehend, let's just say, but you wouldn't know anything about the outside world, and thus you can't write anything about the outside world. You don't even know language. You probably don't know English right out of being born. So that is why, you know, to be human, you have to live as a human. You must have experiences that inspire writing. Even if we take the most nonsensical pieces of literature like Jabberwocky from Alice in Wonderland, you know, they're still grounded in English. Like, let's think about it. You know, Alice in Wonderland, even though you have talking playing cards, talking cats, talking rabbits, and a queen that is about the size of Lord Farquaad, you still have a simple need to get home. And a lot of people want to get home on the interstate, and that's part of being human. So let's look at Jabberwocky and our beautiful illustration of what the Jabberwocky is. 'Twas brillig and the slithy tove stood gyre and gimble in the wave, and all mimsy were the borogoves and the mome breaths out grave. We can see that we can't understand a single bit of it, but we do understand a bit in the structure of this grammar. 'Twas, it was, brillig is maybe a weather state or, you know, a time of the day. Wave, some place where you gyre and gimble, and you always have English conventions here. But we also know that this Jabberwock has claws, jaws, and things that don't make sense to us but are equally terrifying. We were supposed to defeat it as a son. That's the story. There's a father warning his son of a Jabberwock, and we have this beautiful illustration here of what that looks like. That's nonsense, but it is something. It is a story, and all of us have battled our own monsters before or overcome some kind of obstacle, so this isn't too far off from our own relatable experiences. So what is this significance? You know, we have our ideal world, what we want to make of it, you know, our ideals, what we want to spread the word. Like a lot of stories that are driven politically do so because they want to, you know, spread awareness about whatever cause they support. We don't have to agree with it, but they are causes and they should be shared. And also our experiences, you know, we want to internalize what happens every day. And this chaotic world in 2020, this strange world, stories will be told. Like once you get older and you want kids, you will tell them of the chaos that was 2020, and you will want to tell them, you know, how you overcame it, how you got through, and we will want to comment on it to see what mistakes that we don't want to do in the future. And I hope that you've learned something from this and that you can apply it to your lives after this. And I hope you stick around for our second part and third and fourth, and we will be greatly happy to see you striving to learn a bit more about yourself and the world. Thank you.